Hi there, this is the second part of the 4.03 lesson, Eisenhower at the helm. And we were in the midst of the reading, so let's finish. The space race begins, and here on the left is a picture of Sputnik, the USSR satellite launched into space before the United States. In October 1957 came the startling news that the Soviets had launched Sputnik, the world's first artificial satellite, and sent it orbiting the Earth. Americans, long confident of their country's technological superiority to Russia, now faced the frightening prospect of Soviet missiles attacking from space. But Eisenhower, who knew the much greater nuclear capability of the United States, reacted calmly to the news. In response to public concerns, he authorized the National Defense Education Act, a huge dose of federal funding for education, particularly in math and science. The act set a precedent for Washington's new role in public education, which traditionally had been a local affair. While some clamored for the United States to take the lead in space exploration, the president, always concerned about keeping a tight rein on the federal budget, wanted to go slow. Look, Eisenhower told aides, I'd like to know what's on the other side of the moon, but I won't pay to find out this year. With public anxieties mounting over Sputnik, Eisenhower did approve the creation of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, in 1958. Thus began the Soviet-American space race, a peaceful parallel to the arms race between the two superpowers. Eisenhower warns against the military-industrial complex. Meanwhile, the Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev was calling for a peaceful coexistence between the superpowers. As a gesture of goodwill, Eisenhower invited Khrushchev to visit America. For nearly 2 weeks in September 1959, Khrushchev toured the United States. The boisterous Soviet leader assured a New York audience, "I do not have horns." In Hollywood, Khrushchev happily watched a movie being filmed, but then sulked when he could not visit Disneyland because the police could not ensure his safety in such a crowded place. See, even Soviet leaders want to visit Disneyland, right? Despite these friendly overtures, hopes for improved relations between the superpowers were soon dashed. In May 1960, Soviet missiles shot down the American U-2 spy plane and captured the pilot, who had been gathering information on Russia's nuclear arsenal. Eisenhower first denied the plane had been spying, but then admitted the truth. A furious Khrushchev broke off scheduled talks with Eisenhower, who by then was in the last months of his presidency. In early 1961, Eisenhower gave a farewell address in which he expressed his anxieties over how the Cold War was affecting American society. He pointed out that the U.S. military budget now exceeded the combined net income of all U.S. corporations. He warned that the powerful arms industry, out on its own self-interest, might drain the money needed for domestic programs, while it encouraged hostility between the superpowers. Eisenhower declared, "In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought by the military-industrial complex." To the surprise of some, the ex-general ended his political career with an expression of deep concern about the potential consequences of growing military influence. And here's a picture of Khrushchev speaking to reporters after that spy plane was shot down. This is Khrushchev here, the guy standing. Okay, now we're going to read this excerpt, Cold War Anxieties and Popular Culture. The Soviet Union, with its nuclear weapons and voracious appetite for expansion, haunted the imagination of the American people. A new wave of science fiction movies portrayed the horrors of an insidious, spreading communism to a fearful American audience. A 1956 film, The Invasion of the Body Snatchers, large alien vegetable pods consumed Southern California townspeople. A local doctor watches helplessly as the invaders transform his neighbors and eventually his girlfriend. At the movie's conclusion, the doctor stands screaming at the highway's edge as a truck full of pods roars by, headed for Los Angeles, San Francisco, and points north and east. In another film, The Blob, an amorphous blood-red mass grows as it absorbs its victims. The menace is finally frozen in a cold war of fire extinguishers and chemicals and dumped in an Arctic deep freeze. Paranoia in some form crept into every American household. Air raid drills became a schoolhouse routine. For protection in the event of nuclear attack, school children learned how to duck and cover beneath their desks or form a straight line in an interior hallway, futile as these measures might be. Families converted basements into bomb shelters stocked with food, water, and other emergency supplies. Cereal boxes on kitchen tables advertised free inside miniature plastic ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, complete with launchers. No American institution or icon, however popular and beyond suspicion, escaped the communist hysteria. The Cincinnati Reds, America's oldest baseball team deep in the Midwestern heartland, temporarily changed the name to the Redlegs to avoid possible fan boycotts. All right, let's go back to our lesson. So be sure that you've completed your reading guide and check your answers with the lesson answer key. And then we're going to move on to Eisenhower's farewell address activity. Okay, so you will need the Eisenhower's caution sheet, which you can find under lesson resources. And it says the following: Eisenhower's caution. Before leaving office, President Dwight Eisenhower delivered a brief but powerful address on January 17, 1961. For a former general responsible for leading the D-Day invasion at Normandy, he had some surprising words to say about the growing military industry in the United States. And we can go here to listen to excerpts from his farewell address, or go to the second link to read and hear his entire speech. And then complete the Eisenhower's caution activity sheet. So let's go here and listen to some of this. Eisenhower in the Cold War. As a former U.S. Army general and organizer of the D-Day invasion, Dwight Eisenhower understood the terrible consequences of war. He also understood that nuclear weapons had forever changed the face of modern warfare. But Eisenhower knew that the Soviets were developing nuclear weapons, and the United States was therefore compelled to build up its own arsenal to deter attack. He supported the development of sophisticated weapons and missiles capable of delivering warheads to targets thousands of miles away. Eisenhower also understood the dangers of devoting large portions of the American economy to the military. In his farewell address in 1961, he expressed deep concern about the consequences of a growing military influence. He pointed out that the U.S. military budget exceeded the combined net income of all U.S. corporations. He warned that out of its own self-interest, the powerful arms industry might drain money away from domestic programs and encourage hostility between the superpowers. And then if we press the play button here, we can listen to excerpts from his speech in which he warns Americans of the dangers of the military-industrial complex. And I'm not going to listen to the speech in the video. You can do that on your own. And then, of course, check your answers on your Eisenhower caution sheet. They would also be found under the lesson answer key. The answers for that as well. Let's see. Yep, the last part is Eisenhower's caution, where you can also check your answers for the Eisenhower caution sheet. Chapter highlights. So, as you note, there's going to be a quiz at the end of this lesson, and that is going to cover lessons 4.01, 4002, and 4003. So that's why we're going to go through the chapter highlights. Following World War II, nations around the world wanted peace and agreed to establish the United Nations to encourage global cooperation. Instead of withdrawing Soviet troops from Eastern Europe, Joseph Stalin took control of Bulgaria, Romania, and Hungary. Czechoslovakia and Poland began developing an atomic bomb at home. President Truman responded to additional Soviet attempts at expansion by encouraging resistance and using economic aid to support his policy of containment. Truman's Secretary of State, former General George Marshall, developed a plan to provide aid to restore Europe and ensure peace. Soviet attempts to blockade supplies from reaching West Berlin led to an airlift inside the Soviet-controlled East Germany by the United States and Berlin. Shortly after, West Germany became a separate country, and 12 nations formed the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, to further check Soviet aggression. By 1948, Truman's candidacy for the presidency ran into opposition from both within his own party and from Republican opponent Thomas Dewey, but Truman prevailed just as the Cold War heated up. The Soviet Union developed an atomic bomb, and China fell to communist control under the leadership of Mao Zedong a few years before trouble erupted in Korea in 1950. After North Korea invaded South Korea, General Douglas MacArthur led a strong U.S. military response, but he admittedly objected to Truman's policy of limited war and was ultimately fired. Inside the United States, a strong aversion to communism led investigation by HUAC, the questionable conviction of Elger Hiss, the trial of the Rosenbergs, and wild charges brought by Senator Joseph McCarthy. The second Red Scare brought J. Edgar Hoover to head the FBI and a change in the Pledge of Allegiance, and a new national motto, both of which stressed religion. In 1952, former Supreme Allied Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower won the first of his 2 terms as president, followed shortly by Stalin's death, the rise of Nikita Khrushchev, and the launch of both Sputnik and the space race. Okay, so we've gone through the chapter highlights. Be sure to review the past lessons 401, 402, and 403. And then good luck on your 4.03 quiz. Do your best and good luck.